Welcome back to the podcast. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation I had with my friend Cindy O'Neill. We cover a lot of different topics during the conversation, and I think Cindy's story will resonate with a lot of people out there. So I was thrilled when she agreed to be my guest for an episode. Just a little background about Cindy before we jump in. Cindy O'Neill is the Director of Programs for the Connecticut Council of Family Service Agencies. She joined their organization after making her mark in the private sector in various leadership roles. Cindy became interested in working for this nonprofit after volunteering for them on an outreach effort for their Victims of Crime Act case management program. Educated at Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts, she graduated magna cum laude after spending a year studying abroad in Spain. As well as Spain, she lived in Mexico City, Mexico, Syracuse, New York, Baltimore, Maryland, and now resides in Connecticut with her husband, Brian, where they are longstanding members of the Haddam Historical Society and where Cindy serves on the board of directors. In addition to helping facilitate well-being for the families of Connecticut, Cindy and her husband believe in taking care of their mental and physical health through nutrition and exercise. They have 4 children and 6 grandchildren. Here we go. Welcome to the podcast, Cindy O'Neill.
Thank you.
Happy to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here.
See your face, even though it's virtual. As I do with all of the podcasts, I like to have people start by just telling us a little bit about yourself. Tell me about Cindy. What is your story? And just however much you want to detail, you want to tell.
Yeah. So I'll just start with, who am I in the scheme of things, right? So, I'm Cindy O'Neill, and I live in Connecticut, and I pretty much lived in the Northeast for my entire life. I am the mother of 2 children, stepmother of 2 other children, and I have 6 grandchildren. So I've been around for a long time. I graduated from college 42 years ago. That doesn't seem possible to me because in my head, I feel like I'm still 30 years old, right? But yeah, I've been out of college for 42 years. And, I've had a career that I was so lucky to have. I really, really enjoyed my career. I started out wanting to be a teacher, Spanish teacher, and that's what I trained for. I majored in Spanish language and literature in college. I took Spanish, from the 7th grade on, in public school. And, so I got my degree in Spanish language and literature and taught for 1 year. And that's a long story unto itself, but I ended up not making a career of education, but in a way I did, but not in the classic sense. And I went to work for a large corporation and became an investigator, which was like the coolest job to have. They gave me a camera, a briefcase, a car, and off I went, and I investigated stuff, which, for me being a lover of mystery novels, that was the dream job. Plus, it paid me a whole lot more in 1981 than I was making as a teacher. So that was a fun transition on many levels. And so, my career has taken me in many, many directions. Again, I've met so many incredible people that have influenced me in a positive way, and also others who have shown me how I don't want to be. And, just those experiences shaped me into the person that I am today. So today, even though I retired from my corporate career 2 years ago, I wasn't done. I wasn't ready to hang up my cleats, if you will, right? So I was volunteering at a small nonprofit organization. And lo and behold, after about 6 months, the director of programs resigned, and the CEO and I had a chat. And here I am, 18 months later, as the director of programs at this small nonprofit in Connecticut. And I am delighted by this role. It's a very different role than what I had, although in many ways very, very similar too, but just a different focus than what I had previously.
Wow. Well, there's so many things that I want to follow up with, just little parts of it that I thought came to me. So one of the things that I thought was hilarious was the 42 years out of college because I still think I'm 30 years in my head. That's sort of that's the big joke, right? I mean, as somebody who is now 58, yeah, that's a part that is lost sometimes. We have a sense of, yes, our biological person has aged, but our mindset, we don't see that other than we see in the mirror, but
Mhm.
I find that sort of an interesting outcome that was unexpected.
Well, I'll share with you that my mother and father are still with us, and they're both 91 years old, and they would say the same thing. Right? That they still feel like they're 30 or 40 in their heads. Their their bodies have aged, but mentally, they're fortunate. We're all fortunate that they are mentally sound and physically sound after all these years still. But in their heads, they're still young. They're still
Yeah,
young.
yeah. I think that's sort of the one of those narratives that is missed. There's this sense again, but the thought process, the theme of the podcast is, how media sort of, especially for women, we get aged out because this aging, we age, and even when they do show limited things, they're tropes. They're tropes
Mhm.
of the butt of the joke. They tend to be old or cranky or this sense, which isn't the I don't find to be an accurate depiction of most of the people I see age. It's this created narrative, and there are those people who may embrace that creative narrative that they've seen and become that, but
Mhm.
a lot of people don't, which is why I'm saying um the more parts and stories that are told from people who are aging or of a certain age, that narrative can maybe change a bit, because
Mhm.
the only way we're going to change is to change it,
Right, right,
you
right.
know
And
um
what's the story? What's the saying now that 50 is the new 40 or 60 is the new 50, or whatever it is. But it is funny to me to think back, what I thought of when I was younger. When I thought of somebody in their like mid 60s, like I am, right? I'd think, oh my God, they're so old, mid 60s. But now that I'm here,
yeah.
I think in many ways I'm better than I was. Well, no, I know I'm better than I was when I was in my 30s or 40s. I know that for a fact.
Yeah. Well, what's the other part that's kind of interesting to me is there's more and more research that is starting to come out in terms of the mythologies of what aging is, and trying to make the case against the ageism that exists in society, because while there are certain parts that where they're learning our brain, certain parts of our brain, the tasks change, but we develop other skills and
Mhm,
those get better. So
mhm,
it's not that our brain becomes depleted, it just shifts in where the skills sort of develop. And I find that really kind of an interesting shift. And there was a study out of Yale where they were realizing that older adults that have a positive sense of what aging is live healthier lives
mhm,
for longer, and they live a longer life. So the more we can do to give better depictions of what aging looks like, as opposed to it's something we should avoid at all cost. And I think there's a whole level of shame that goes along with it, especially for women with the anti-aging and the thing, and God forbid there's a sense of like, oh, we lose our value, right?
mhm,
If you don't show positive images of what it is, and that it's okay to have it happen, we feel bad about it.
mhm.
And that has some other unintended consequences in terms of what our physical body does and what our mind does, right?
Right, right. And I think honestly, where I am today with grandchildren and adult children, this is such a rich period in my life, actually. Um, there isn't the same level of striving that you do when you are younger, right? You're striving to achieve something in your career. You're striving to raise geniuses, right? You feel the pressure. You feel the pressure as a parent, that you must raise the most productive, smartest, greatest kid on the planet. And if you don't, you're a failure. That is so not true. But you don't get to that until after the fact. Particularly surviving the teen years. Someone had once said to me, grandchildren is your gift for not killing your teenagers, right? Because the teenage years can be very grueling. Um, and you have all kinds of fears about who your children are going to actually be, and are they going to make it into their adulthood? And then they all get there and they're fantastic people. They're
Yeah.
fantastic people. And then you get to dote on their kids and spoil their kids, and it's such a great revenge.
Well, what's interesting, but isn't that so interesting? And again, this sort of ties into the questions that promotes questions. Why is that the pressure? Where did we absorb? Now, I did not end up having children, but what narrative did parents ingest that was the expectation of what had to happen? They have to create this productive blah blah blah. Is that something we organically decide what is supposed to happen, or did we think we should do it? Or and I have questions. I don't know the answer to it, but somewhere along the line people buy into something
Mhm.
that is a narrative that is out there of what is normal, what is
Right.
expected.
Mhm.
And bucking that system is not always an easy thing for people who choose to say, I don't buy into that. And then you're like, what do you mean you don't buy into it? Because then we start that comparison stuff. Well, if they're
Oh.
not doing it, mine might be wrong, or is theirs
Mhm.
right? And that to me is so interesting that it happens a lot. It's
Mhm.
not an uncommon experience, and it continues. It
Oh, yeah.
continues. We have these expectations, all these benchmarks. Anyway, I just find it interesting that, again, like what you just said, you have to achieve, you have to do this, and it's like, and I wonder, like, when did that? At what point was that the thing? And like you said, as you get older and you look back into that and you question it more because you're like,
Mhm.
what was I thinking? But when you're in it, you don't ask those questions as much.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. It is interesting because I feel like the role of parent has changed dramatically over the years. Like when I think about, how my parents were raised, right? They were born in 1931, right? And nobody was worrying about whether they were getting their homework done. It was just expected that, your job as a kid was to go to school, do your homework, come home and do your chores. And nobody was worried about, your self esteem necessarily, right? You were just expected to do what kids were expected to do. That's changed quite a bit, to today, where parents, it seems to me, parents feel so obligated to give their child the perfect life, the right amount of attention, never let their feelings get hurt. I'm not sure that's productive, but I think that's a whole nother story, Elisa, right? That's a whole
Well,
nother
and
story.
again, a lot of these things happen because we shift and they go in directions that were unintended, or they get multiplied in ways that wasn't the original intent, or and we're not quite sure where it all comes from sometimes. We're not sure
Mhm.
when it started, how it evolved, um, but it's just kind of interesting because, like I said, our rules, and for you, I found it was the other thing I found really interesting was that you went to school for education.
Mhm.
And I wonder sometimes, did you do that because it was the 80s and that's sort of what women did?
Um, so as a small kid, my sister and my neighbors, we would play school. We would play
Yeah.
school, and I always wanted to be I always wanted to be the teacher. I always saw myself as the teacher. So it kind of just evolved from that. I guess I always sort of thought of myself in that role. Um, Nobody in my family was a teacher, but it just
Hmm,
seemed like that's the career I'd like to have. I
which is cool.
enjoyed school. Yeah, I enjoyed school. I was, it's kind of interesting to me because, I think of myself as the shy girl who overcame, right?
Mm,
Because, I was the kid who was an excellent student, even in kindergarten, right? I was an excellent student. I did all the things that I was supposed to do, right? I got A's. I always got, the satisfactory in behavior, right? I'm talking about elementary school. And yet, and yet, I was also the kid who the day that the report cards at the end of the year were passed out, back in those days when I was a little kid, you got a cardboard report card, right?
yeah.
And you got all your grades, and then you'd flip it over and you'd see whether or not you got promoted to the next grade and who your teacher was going to be, right? So I would get mine, and with great fear and anticipation, I would flip over my thing because I wasn't sure whether I was actually going to get promoted, even though I was an excellent student. And that's all I ever heard. You're an excellent student, you're a great kid, blah, blah, blah. But I was always unsure of myself,
Isn't
right?
that interesting?
Right, right. I was never confident that, somehow I was going to turn it over and I was going to have to like repeat third grade or something, right? Um, and I never felt particularly special in that way. It just who I was, school work came easily to me, but I never felt like I was the smartest kid in the room. By far, I was the kid who didn't really, raise her hand and, offer her insights or anything like that. I was not eager to answer the question. I liked to be sort of in the background. I was very shy. And, as I aged, that was the feedback that I would get from my teachers. And that my parents would get from my teachers that, we wish Cindy would contribute more. But
Mm.
I was a shy kid. I was a shy kid, and that was, uh, interesting to me, and yet, even though I was shy, there were certain things that I wanted to do that I was not gonna let my shyness interfere. So, for example, I wanted to be a teacher, and then as I went through high school and college, I had a passion for Spanish. I took Spanish all through grade school, um, and I just loved Spanish. And I was lucky enough to go on a trip to Spain in my junior year in high school. My
Wow.
parents paid for me to go, and I fell in love with the country. I fell in love with the culture. Um, and so I decided that I was going to be a teacher, but I was going to be a Spanish teacher, right? So I was going to go to college and I was going to perfect my Spanish. I was going to become fluent in Spanish. And I found that that was a lot harder to accomplish than I thought, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm being taught by Americans who have learned Spanish just like I have, right? So all through school, I was being taught by teachers who had, the Americanized version of Spanish. Then when I went to college, I was being taught by professors who were native Spanish speakers. And my head just was like, oh my God, what language are they speaking? I didn't even recognize it, right? So that's when I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I need to go somewhere and be surrounded by Spanish speaking people. So my advisor in college put me in connection with a university, summer school university program in Mexico City. I hadn't been anywhere other than Canada because my family is from Canada, but other than that, I hadn't traveled really anywhere, right? But yet this shy girl got on an airplane by her little self and flew to Mexico City not knowing a soul. And got off the plane, got in a cab, gave the cabbie my address that I was going to for the family that I was going to live together for the next 6 weeks, and I was going to go to university classes, right? So when I think back on that, I was like, "What?" It seems so out of
So that
character for me.
you had a level of shyness, but you still had a lot of curiosity
Mhm.
and desire to want to share your gifts.
Mhm. Yeah, I wanted to be a Spanish teacher, and I had to figure out how I was gonna do that, and I learned that I was not going to speak Spanish in the way that I wanted to speak Spanish if I didn't immerse myself. So, that was great. I had a wonderful 6 weeks. I made great friends while I was there. It was great. But what I learned was, I had so much further to go,
Mm.
because I really could not speak the language even after studying it for like 7 years between junior high and high school. So I came back from my Mexico summer and, promptly said to my parents, "That was really great. Now I need to spend my junior year in Spain." And my mother was like, "What?" Because it
Oh
was like,
gosh.
it was she was not comfortable with me being half a world away, in Mexico, let alone being on the other side of the Atlantic, right, in Spain for a year. But my dad, who has, tremendous, curiosity and wanderlust. He would travel anywhere, anytime at the drop of a hat. I must have gotten it from him because my dad was like, "You're absolutely going to go. This is a great experience. You're absolutely going to go." So I was accepted into a junior year abroad program in Madrid.
Which is kind
And
of amazing,
yeah,
especially for the time.
yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that was not
That
a
was
that was pretty brave. That
1978.
wasn't the norm.
That was 1978, right? Right.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
was
I mean,
1970.
well, I shouldn't say it wasn't the norm. I guess the late 70s, a lot of young people were going
Yeah.
abroad and
Yep.
youth
Yep.
hostels and backpacking, so that maybe it wasn't so odd. I don't know.
No, I think it was pretty common, to study abroad if you had the opportunity to do it and it made sense. But it was a wonderful experience. But again, I didn't know a soul. I didn't know anybody. I just went and showed up where I was supposed to show up and got connected with the right people. And so yeah, so even though I characterize myself as the shy girl who overcame, there was something in me that said, "But you can do it. You can do these things."
You can do
Um,
these things.
yeah, you can do these things. And again, I was lucky because I had supportive parents who made it possible for
Yeah.
me to do those things. And
Yeah,
I'll tell
that's
you what
true.
the greatest payoff was for that. My mom and dad came and visited me in Madrid, during Holy Week of all times, which is like the biggest thing that ever happens in Spain, right? Semana Santa. And they came over and they had rented a car. I met them at the airport. And so I'd been there by then for 6 or 7 months. And I met them at the airport, and there was some boo boo with their rental car. So I lead them to a telephone, and I get on the phone, and I'm like blah 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 blah, blah, having my whole conversation in Spanish without thinking twice. I turned around to ask them a question, and they're both looking at me with their jaws like hanging open. I was like, "See, Dad,
It
the money
worked.
was well spent, right? I can speak Spanish." And being in the subway system and having a native Spanish speaker ask me for directions in the subway was a huge accomplishment as well.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, so then I became a teacher for a year, and that went by the wayside because the teacher that I was there on a temporary basis, but I was
Mm.
reassured that she would never return.
Oh,
But she did. So I was out of a job. So that's how I got into my corporate life, and started at the bottom, and continued to be the young woman who did the things that she had to do, things that she was expected to do, was never a big contributor, in group settings, always remained, to be quite reticent to put my opinion out there and kind of put myself out there. It felt very risky to me that somebody would discredit my idea, or somehow think I'm dumb. That saying,
oh
it's
yeah.
better to, yeah, okay. So all right, so that went on, and I had a good 15 years at the one company, and then I moved to Maryland to get married. And so I got a new job in the same industry, just a different company in a different state. And that was a moment for me. That to me, I look at that as the turning point. This was 1997, so I was
Hmm.
not quite 40 years old. And and I said to myself, you keep hearing that you should contribute more. And so I said, nobody knows me at this new company, not a soul. I am a complete unknown. I have the opportunity to change myself if I'm brave enough to do that.
Hmm.
So I said, all right, maybe maybe I'll just start putting my ideas out there and come what may, right? And I also simultaneously read in the 2 weeks between I left my old job and went to my new job and moved into the new house and all that stuff. I read Catherine Graham's autobiography, A
Oh,
Personal
yeah.
History. Mhm.
Hmm.
And if anybody's familiar with that book, Catherine Graham talks about how she went from a wealthy sort of debutante type person whose father owned the Washington Post. She married a Harvard law graduate,
Hmm.
and she was the quintessential 1950s woman, right? She was the little woman behind the big man and raising the children and running the household, and really didn't seem to have much aspiration beyond that. And then her husband committed suicide, and
Hmm.
she had to make a decision. What am I going to do? I felt like I was reading my own story, to be honest. She had a moment where she could change her life too, and she did. She said, you know what, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try to be the editor of and owner of the Washington Post. And she went and she sat on the board of directors. She was the only woman in the room, and they
Hmm.
ridiculed her. They
Oh, yeah.
they were brutal to her.
Brutal.
They ridiculed her. And I came away from reading that book saying, gosh darn it, if Catherine Graham can do it, I can do it. I
Well,
have an
I mean, part of,
inspiration.
like you said, I think sometimes it's there were stories in our head. One of my previous interviews was my friend Eleni Kalakos, and she
Mhm,
teaches a lot. She wrote a book called Claim the Stage, and she does a lot of motivational speaking. She's a coach to give people public speaking skills because she used her stage background. And one of the things that she said when I said, oftentimes those who control the stories control the culture, which is the theme of the podcast, right? And we're seeing that play out in some pretty dark ways right now. But there's a lot of
right.
people trying to control some stories or go back and take stories away from young people because no, it's very scary times. But she says, and those, how did she put it? She says, and the stories, whoever controls the stories in our head control us, and that's our work to do. And we have to
Exactly.
ask those questions of ourselves. When I was saying, like, one of the things I started to talk about why I wanted to do it, I was watching so many stories of women hitting a certain age starting to feel invisible.
Mhm,
And I was like, why is that? And then I looked, I'm like, oh, because we became invisible. We did become
mhm,
invisible. We're aging out of the stories that are out there, even though our lives are not aging out. We're moving on and we continue and we're vibrant and still active. And to your point, the stories to me get richer, but
mhm,
they're not. So we get the story becomes in our head that we subliminally bring in that, oh, well, maybe we should just be quiet. And for a long time, the narrative for women, I mean, for eons actually, but
mhm,
in our lifetime, it was still a story of play this role. And those were the
mhm,
roles that we were seeing, were this is what you should do, this is how you should behave. And we don't recognize how much we ingest that
mhm,
as young women. We don't realize how much we're taking it in, and it's creating a different narrative, whether it's the shy girl. Was it you were shy, or did you get was it encouraged to be a nice girl and be quiet? And because that was a narrative once upon a time when we were young. That is not as
absolutely.
necessarily there, but it still exists today because even as women, and trust me, I consider myself pretty feminist. I catch myself how many habits I fall in with young girls,
Mhm,
talking to young girls because of my old habits that I never thought I didn't realize were unconscious. I heard
mhm.
somebody say, young girls start to get a lot of lose their self-esteem and how they're perceived. Their physical body becomes, they learn at a very young age.
Mhm.
They're boys and girls seem to be very similar in their self-esteem until and they depart at a certain age and girls
Yeah,
start to and then I thought and they said, "'Cause what is the first thing we say to little girls when we see them?
right.
We compliment them on their looks."
Mhm, absolutely.
And,
Yep.
oh my god, I had a guttural, like, gasp of my own because I was like, "I do it all the time," and didn't even I was like, "I do that." And
Mhm,
here I think, like, "We need to not do that, and we should not enforce these old trips and blah, blah, blah," and yet it was habit, and it was
mhm,
what's modeled to me.
mhm.
It's how I grew up, and then I was still doing it completely unconsciously.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's the first thing we see a little girl and we say, "Aren't you cute? Aren't you lovely?" We see a little boy, and that doesn't even cross our minds to say, "Aren't you cute? Aren't you
"Look
handsome?"
at your
That we
nice
don't.
little outfit."
Right, exactly, right. What a
I
pretty
and it's
dress.
not we
Yeah,
don't even do it, like,
no,
thinking about it. So,
no.
those were the things that those that starts me asking questions.
Mhm,
So, I find it really interesting. This is again where I go, when we start getting aged out, and it's changing. I mean, we're
it is.
seeing more platforms and broader stories and more women getting behind the helms. They are telling different stories in broader writing rooms. And especially at least getting into their 40s. We're still trying to push back the 50s and 60s, but we're making
Mhm,
progress because more of us are over 50 now. But what I find so interesting, you were turning 40
mhm. Yeah,
and there was a shift there for you,
mhm.
and and oftentimes when we hear these stories and we depict these stories of women have huge, amazing careers going into their 40s, 50s, 60s, great accomplishments, even if there's a biopic, they tell the story up until they hit about 40,
Right,
45, and then there's like a couple of little paragraphs at the end
right.
'cause they only tell the young part of their story,
Mhm.
and so if we were to tell your story and we go, "And then at 40, she became this other person and it went away," what would we have missed?
Right.
What's lost now? What happened when you turned 40, and what shifted for you in your life?
Yeah. So, so I just made a commitment to myself to try a different approach, right? To think about Catherine Graham and how um she was brave and she just tried and she, like what let's see what's going to happen. So I did that. So I started my new job and I started just putting my ideas out there, come what may. It was risky. It was scary. I mean, it really was. I wasn't used to doing that. But I'll tell you what happened. Um, I would say 90% of the time, my ideas, my thoughts were well received. Right. And
Hmm.
okay, guess what? I wasn't necessarily um I mean, I knew I wasn't I knew I wasn't dumb, right? But I didn't know if I was adding value, if my comments were adding value to the conversation. And what I discovered that when I took that barrier away from myself and just tried it to see what would happen if I did, it, guess what? I found that my comments and my contributions added value and people told me that. And so that gave me the reinforcement to just keep doing it. Keep doing it. Yeah. And so, as I continued on in my career, I just I never became the most talkative person in the room ever. And Elisa,
That's okay.
yeah. Um, but I wasn't as reticent to hold back on my thoughts.
Did that have an impact in the trajectory of your careir? Did
I
you
would
find
say
you started
so.
getting more responsibility, and did you
Oh, yeah.
see
There's no question. There's no question, that, adding value is recognized, in many ways, right? Um, So yes, I mean, I got promotions. I became, for the company that I worked for, I became the first female claims manager in the region, right?
Mhm.
So, and I hate to tell you that that wasn't 100 years ago either, which is kind
Huh.
of a sad statement
Yeah.
in and of itself, right? Um, but yes, and then I was promoted to a national level position. So yeah, what I would say to anybody that's
Anybody.
listening is that um, you have to get to a place where you're ready, right, to do it,
Mhm.
to take those risks, and then if you feel ready for it, do it, do it because it will pay off. And so I retired at age 62, and as I mentioned, I wasn't ready to be done yet, and so
Which is the
now I
other
am.
part of the story that's fascinating. Here you go. Like,
Right,
you
right.
didn't just go and you didn't go it you're still active.
Yes, yes, yes. I am still making a difference, in my work. We're a nonprofit organization that helps people who have been victims of crime and who are, below the poverty level. So we are, funded by the state of Connecticut to administer a variety of programs that literally make a life and death difference for some of the
Mm,
people that we service, right? So that's very gratifying and very inspiring for me. Um, which is not to say that my prior career wasn't similar. It just was not the same. That was still a helping
sure.
job, but this makes a real difference.
This is
This
your
this makes a
hands-on. You're
Yeah. I mean, this is helping people finding a place to live. This is helping people feed their families. So it's very, very impactful. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed my second career, if you will, my second career. And a lot of people, when I said that, I was going to go back to work, but in a different capacity, the question was, well, are full time? And I'm like, yes, yes, not part time. This is a absolutely full time commitment, and I'm energized by it. I'm energized by it because I think of myself as a problem solver, right? And that kind of goes back to my investigative and my mystery loving. I love solving problems. I love it. And sometimes I want to tear my hair out over the problems that I have to solve, but that's what I do every day is I solve problems for people. I solve problems, and that's very gratifying. Very gratifying.
it's really interesting though, because I think that again, if I were to keep it in the thematic part of the mass media stories that we see and that aren't being told,
Mhm.
I think yours is a perfect example of here you are, you did all the things that whatever was supposed to do, whatever that means, you follow that path. And the narrative was you did your thing, you put your time in, your thing, and you go off into the sunset and just that is not typically what I'm seeing for a lot of people. Yeah,
Right.
there are some people who do retire and enjoy retirement and they maybe they go travel and
Mhm.
that's one story. And it's a good story and it's a lovely story. It's not everybody's story.
No.
And I think if that is sense is if we don't give examples of women like yourself who are their story continues. They have richness and characters, and you're doing all this stuff. That is not a lot of people's story. Many people I know have stayed in the workforce, or they retired from one career and chose a whole new thing, and continued to stay engaged,
Mhm. Mhm.
continued to challenge themselves. That are very active and very looking for ways to stay gratified in their life. Um, we
And
don't
and what
see
I
a lot
would
of them.
No, and what I would add to that, Elisa, is I would challenge businesses to really think twice about the older population, right? As extraordinary opportunities to bring experience to their organizations. Because of the work that I did in my previous career, I had all the skills and knowledge to be able to bring it to this new role, even though it's in a different sphere, right? It's nonprofit versus profit. It's social services, not claim services, right? But what I mean is all of those years that I devoted and learned how to manage people, right? Learned how to focus on outcomes for my business, right? All of those skills that I learned and walked away with at age 62, right? Are now bringing tremendous benefit to another organization that was lacking that level of experience. And so the programs now have benefited tremendously from what I've brought. I know that sounds like I'm ringing my own bell, but what I'm saying is it brought greater efficiency and process, and our funders are happy with what we're doing. I mean, and that's a
Well,
big deal, right?
but the challenge you have, we don't have to go into it because I think it could take us into a very long way. Uh, One of the issues that you probably have recognized is attracting skills in the nonprofit thing because the our culture does not, in my personal opinion, reward those salaries
Oh,
in the places we don't value that service as something that should be paid at the level of where corporate America does somehow. And and I get the salaries are based on where the funding, and they're struggling for that funding. But I think culturally, you have to have a calling to be in that,
mhm.
and getting people to stay in that is not an easy task because, again, they're not paid, even though the scope of the responsibility of what you're seeing and what these people do, and they're making life and death support systems for people, and they're not getting those types of salaries. And it's hard to get people. In some ways you could almost say for nonprofits, you have an opportunity if somebody's retired and maybe they don't need to make that level of income. You
Mhm.
have an opportunity to enrich, to I don't know. It
Uh,
makes me think about it differently
yes.
because, but I think culturally, I mean, look at what you said at the very beginning. You were a teacher, and then you made a lot more money in corporate America, which is a
Mhm,
sad reflection. The education that you took, that you
mhm.
invested in to get to there, and that wasn't. And I don't know what the answer is to that, because that can be a whole you and I could go on
That's
for
a
that
whole
about a
nother
million.
story. Yeah, I mean, I have thought for so many years that, culturally, we are so misguided in terms where we place our priorities. When you look at our most vulnerable citizens, being our youngest, our babies, and our elderly, and our needy, we pay the minimum wage to take, we pay minimum wage for people to care for
Mhm.
those communities of people, and yet we will spend millions to an athlete to carry a football or a basketball. I cannot comprehend that priority set. I just cannot. I
Right.
cannot.
Well, but I mean, look at the inequity of CEO pay right now.
Mhm, mhm.
I mean, come on. They're making like now 1,000 times more
Yeah,
than the
sure.
person they think, and they can have huge failures, and they still
Mhm.
walk out with golden parachutes, and they
Right.
they literally bled the company dry, and they walked away with an extra $50 million bonus. I'm like, so it's
Yeah,
not
no.
just sports. I mean, the whole corporate structure
Mhm.
has gotten out of whack, because
Yeah.
when you and I grew up and our parents, that was not the way it was.
Mm-mm. No.
I mean, profit was a thing, but not profit at all cost. That
Right.
changed, sadly, honestly, when you and I came into the workforce. I personally think there's been a very big shift in that mentality when shareholders and CEOs and presidents started becoming the same people, even though they served different masters. That's a
Mm.
pretty modern um,
Right.
the thing that came in the 90s and the 2000s. And again, whether it's an athlete or thing, we can see that, but we have to look at it's not just athletes, it's not just the people
Right.
that get advertised. The corporate world has been doing it and it getting really bad.
Right.
And we as a culture have to make some decisions here because we know it's out of whack. We all feel it. We
Of
can
course.
feel it. But oftentimes, if you're in it, you don't see it until you had this opportunity to see another side.
Mhm.
And I think there's value in anybody who gets to see two sides that you might ask different questions. You would see opportunities in ways that maybe you wouldn't have seen before.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, there's no question. There's no question. So, but,
We
I
you know,
think
that's a whole thing, but this is where I think if we could get more women women I mean, I think women at the table, women's stories, women leading the stories, women telling the stories. It's
Mhm.
not that men's point of view is not valuable. It's
Right.
just only half the story of the point of
Mhm.
view we need to be hearing from.
Yes.
Women come to the table asking different questions for a
Absolutely.
variety of reasons.
Right. No, I mean, just, just in terms of decision making, right? The diversity of opinion is so necessary because we all have our own paradigm, right? We all know what we know, but someone else with completely different experiences or cultures or, whatever, they're bringing different ideas to the table and different points of view that, others of us have never, ever thought about, never
Sure.
thought about. Yeah.
And from a media standpoint, when I think of young creatives, if they heard your story, this is I mean, not that it has to be your biopic, but here's a woman who this is how a woman of this age talks. This is what their life is. This is a choice that you could make creatively when you're depicting a woman. And if a
Mhm,
woman if older women were telling these stories, they would absolutely rewrite these characters and not
mhm.
fall back on tropes.
I'll tell you a trope that I find tiring, um, is the trope of the female leader as a, bitch.
Mhm.
That is not
You can
what
use the word on a
happens.
podcast.
Okay, thanks,
We can
bitch.
say bitch.
Right. But, that
Mhm,
um, whenever I see that whenever I see that, I cringe because that is not
mhm.
what women do in leadership roles. And more, the more experienced leaders, female leaders, are raising up the younger leaders and mentoring them and teaching them that you don't have to act like just a tyrant. That's
Mm-mm.
such an old version of leader, such an old and
Right.
I'm not saying, and men aren't tyrants anymore either. I mean, somewhere along the line about 10 or 15 years ago, it finally occurred to us that leaders don't have to be scary. But for many, many years, the leader in an organization was, a scary person. They would yell at you and they would, be mean and awful. And that's not
Well,
what leaders
I'm
are.
it's really fascinating because I recommend a book. I just started reading this book. It's called Cassandra Speaks. And I just got to this part in it's by Elizabeth Lesser.
Mhm.
And she is one of the reasons why she kind of helped she sort of hearing about her book made me go, I know my podcast idea is a good idea because she wrote a
Mhm.
book similarly, but she went into the old stories like literature and mythology
Yeah.
and religious text of how much up until very recently, um, all of them were written by men.
Mhm.
Everything that we have ingested since we were little has
Yep.
all been text that was written from the point of view of the man.
Sure.
And she talked about in the book, when she was looking at a box of books that were her son's, assigned her son in college on about leadership. It was all the and it was like Machiavelli. I mean, these were this was considered text of how to be leaders, and this was passed down, and if you probably go, it was, I mean, these were very tyrannical. That was the mindset of what a leader was supposed to
Hey,
be,
I
and it was
lived it.
taught in business schools.
I lived it. I
Right.
lived it in corporate America in the 1980s and 90s and 2000s. That was still the model for a good leader. That was the model to be so, um, like, just demanding
Be
and
well,
and
I mean,
and
the
scary.
basically, the little part of the book is like, "Instill fear, they'll respect you."
Yes, right,
Tha
right.
and of course,
And
but that is a very sort of not, again, if men are writing the text and men are writing the things and these, but a woman wouldn't come to, I'm not saying women don't come to it sometimes that way, they can, if
oh,
that's
yeah,
what they're told, is
that's
that, but if we start changing the stories of who's telling those stories, maybe they would ask different questions. And
it's
there's
true.
plenty of evidence in other cultures in other countries where they've, um, for example, elected officials, they've mandated it's 50%.
Mhm, right.
In all legislative bodies, it's 50. And the approach to what they started legislating shifted completely because the things the women would ask questions and focus on were not the same.
Right.
Wasn't say they were wrong, it just changed priorities because
Mhm.
they came to the table with a new point of view. They just
Absolutely.
asked different questions. That's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, and, the sad part is that, I know many, many female leaders from that time period, that earlier time period who, they were fed that story about what a leader is supposed to be, and unfortunately, they believed it and they acted accordingly,
So
which,
it was what they were modeled. That
exactly,
was
and
it.
it was what was expected of them,
And
because
what
to
was
behave
rewarded.
otherwise, right, and because at that time, to behave otherwise was a weakness. It was a
Right.
weakness. You were
Right.
not rewarded, right,
Right.
absolutely.
So when women be which the point of the book is, when women become the storytellers, culture shifts. And it's not to say there are that men are all wrong in their point of
No.
view. That's not. It's saying you're only getting one point of view. And
Mm,
it's putting it is influencing culture in ways that we didn't recognize. And so in terms of the entertainment industry or mass media, again, the majority of the stories that are told, especially when women started to get age, it does influence what happens in business, in
mhm,
society for women age. They are, I'm sorry, but it is a different story for women in aging and what happens to women in business and men in business when they start to age. And I've seen it. I've seen it. Um, I have friends who've experienced it. So it's not just entertainment that the stories get aged out and that
mhm,
actresses
mhm,
get aged out. That lack of visibility of women in leadership roles or women in an adult, more mature role has an influence on the way women are treated in our society. It just does.
yeah,
There's an expectation. I mean, so if we could get better examples of women at all age, first of all,
mhm,
but show women in aging that is nothing to be afraid of, nothing to be shamed, it's something that we should be embracing. Look at what you just said. My life is richer.
mhm,
I have experience that I you prioritize how you approach a problem differently than you
mhm.
did in your 30s.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yep, yep.
Right? And men probably have similar things, but
Sure.
men are allowed to age in film where women didn't. So it was men's got into more leadership roles, the
Mhm, mhm.
gray-haired silver
Right. Yep,
CEO. But
yep.
how often did you see a gray-haired female CEO? Well,
Right,
first of all, you can't even be gray hair in business if you're a woman.
right,
Can't happen.
right, right. Yeah.
How often does
Yeah.
it happen? It doesn't. I cannot tell you the number of women who told me they stopped coloring their hair after they retired because they literally quote, you cannot you cannot stop coloring your hair if you're in business."
Right.
That was a quote. Said, "You have to color your hair if you're in business."
Yeah.
That was a
Yeah.
fact. That was like,
Yeah.
"This is just the way it is." And it's like, it's the way it is until we say
It is. It
it
isn't.
isn't.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So, I loved your story because, first of all, there was so many ahas how hi, young people. Just so you know, if you're listening, yes, you're always gonna think you're 30 even when you're 60. I know
That's
you
right.
think, it
Right.
doesn't change, and you're so if you're a young creative, if you're a young person listening, or if you're a young, storyteller, any opportunities you have if you're writing older characters, think of Cindy O'Neill and how she talks today. You still exercise. I know you're a runner, right?
Oh, every day. No, I do weight training, and I go every day. I go 6 days a week. The only day I take off is Sunday. I lift weights, and, it's tremendous. It's tremendous. I mean, you wanna talk about, improving balance and, just your bone density. It's been a game changer for me. I've dropped 30 pounds, just by changing how I eat and the level of activity. And I'm not saying that I'm at the gym for 3 hours. I'm at the gym literally for like 40 minutes every day. And it's so I can't speak enough about how much it does for not only my physical being, but my psyche as well. I can go in there right after work, and I have a personal trainer that I work with, right? So I'm doing something that's designed just for me and my goals and my capabilities, right? But I'll get there at say 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's something that's like super stressy on my mind from work that I just walked out of. But I'm telling you, after 40 minutes of lifting weights and doing dippy birds and all kinds of different things, um, it's like I'm a new person when I come out. I can't even express how real that is for me, and how when I don't go, I miss it. Have you ever heard? I mean, how many people do you hear say that they miss when they can't go to the gym? But I do. It's that significant for me.
Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah.
here's a perfect character idea, young creatives. And anything that we're doing now is going to make your life better in 30 years because if we can start shifting now into the next group coming up will not be having these same conversations. You'll be embracing it in new ways.
Right.
So anything we can do will benefit for all, but there is value to your life, and you witnessed it when you went and volunteered because you wanted to volunteer, and then you're like, I am not done yet.
Hmm.
That's the
Yeah.
part I love, what you just
Right.
said. I wasn't done yet.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I still have a lot to offer. I still have a lot to offer.
And yay. In other words, there's more to your story. You didn't just fall off the face of the earth at 40, or you didn't stop at 50, or you didn't stop at 60 and just go off into the sunset
Right.
and do whatever I think people do. And again, if there is I understand they need to, from business, they want to attract youth because they want to keep the
Mhm.
sustainable. I get it. But there is if you have youthful people working with uh older people, I think that collaboration
Yeah.
actually could be remarkable because
Right.
they're coming in with ideas. You have wisdom of how you shifted priorities through time, and those could be fabulous collaborations actually.
Mhm.
They're not
Mhm.
they don't need to be in competition with each other.
Right. Right. No, absolutely, and I'm always willing to, share my, experiences and just, being a female that came up at a time when there weren't many females necessarily in the meeting rooms and, that kind of stuff, and, just what was that like, and what did I learn from that? And, anyway, it's, I felt very blessed in my career, especially, I mean, it just, I got to do so many incredibly cool things, and I'm still doing incredibly cool things. I really enjoy it. Really enjoy it.
Well, and you were brave even though you were a shy girl.
Right.
And you're still
Yes.
being brave. You went back out and tried something totally new.
Yep.
That could
Yep.
have been scary.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, what I went to had nothing to do with what I used to do. Whole different ball game, but yet again, the skills and knowledge that I have apply themselves beautifully. The people that I came in to manage, were they skeptical? Uh-huh. Here's a person who's never been in human services ever, has never worked in a nonprofit, and suddenly I'm going to manage, these programs. And so the good news is that the skills and knowledge are transferable, and it's just a matter of the learning curve, for that particular business. So I would say to anybody
But
out
you
there,
allowed yourself to learn. You didn't come in and say, I'm going to do it all my way. You
right.
learned the business you're in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, my learning was listening to the people around me that have been doing it for years and years. Who am I to make a decision about something that I don't know anything about? Of course, I have to listen to the people that are doing the work, and then you just make a
And then
decision
you
based
figured
on your.
out how to problem solve.
Yep. Yep.
You took your
Yep.
curiosity, you took your investigative mind
Hmm.
and said, Now I have a puzzle. I have a problem I can solve."
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which
Yep.
that is a cool story.
Well, great.
I mean, just the
I've enjoyed my cool story. Yeah. I'm still enjoying it.
well, so I'm so glad you came on and talked about it because I think your story is not an uncommon one. I think there's
Right.
many women out there doing amazing things. I encourage any creative storytellers out there to think of, what you represent, you know. I happen to know you as a curious person because you reach out and ask me questions, and we've
Mhm.
even past our professional backgrounds.
Yep.
Um, we need more curious people, and we need
Mhm.
people like you sharing your story
Well, I'm
to
glad.
help rewrite the narratives that are not serving us well.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked me. I'm glad you asked me to tell my story. I was happy to do so. It was fun.
You are welcome to share the name of your nonprofit if you'd like anybody to support what you do. We can certainly, I can have a link if you'd like
Great.
people to give donations or anything. Please, we'll put it on the website in the show notes because
That would
anything
be
that we can do to
marvelous.
help services for others,
Yep. That
I'm
would
all
be
for it.
marvelous. That would be marvelous. It is the Connecticut Council of Family Service Agencies.
We need people going into these services.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what you said earlier is, the pay isn't the greatest in the world, but the rewards are tremendous, actually. It's very inspiring to see the stories, and see the case managers, working with folks and what they're able to accomplish with them. But I'd say the biggest thing that anybody could do for the Connecticut Council of Family Service Agencies is find us on Facebook and like us and share us.
Oh, and so to let more people know that the services exist.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
you're out there
Exactly right.
to help
Yep.
them. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Cindy O'Neill. Thanks for
Oh,
coming.
thank you. Thank
We
you.
went a
It was
little
a
over an hour
pleasure.
because, well, we did.
Yeah, because that's what we normally do anyway.
Well, we didn't go too. We did pretty good.
We
We
did.
didn't go too far. All right.
All
Thanks.
right. Thank you.
There's More to Our Story podcast was created by me, Elisa Gallagher, your host, is produced by Brian Richards. Theme music is by Andy Littlewood. And until next time, please follow the podcast wherever you choose to listen.